they say the difference between a good prosecutor and a bad prosecutor. A good prosecutor wins 80% of his cases. A bad one wins 70% of his cases.
Hello and welcome to the Attorney Post, where we give you the inside scoop with top attorneys in their field. And now, here's our host, Justin West.
All right. Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Attorney Post, where we discuss what's going on in various facets of the law with attorneys at the top of their game to help you navigate the ins and outs of the various legal fields and jurisdictions. Because, as I always say, if you don't know your rights, you don't have any. Today, I'm very pleased to be joined by James Bendell of the eponymous law firm that bears his name, Bendell Law Firm. Jim, how you doing today?
Doing well, thank you.
Awesome. And I meant to ask you this in the pre-roll, so I'm sorry that I didn't. But would you prefer to be called James or Jim, or call you whatever you
Everybody
want? I'll
calls
call
me
you late for
Jim.
dinner.
They call me Jim, and I don't like being called James because I was in trouble in school. The teacher was James Bendell, get up here. So I like to be called Jim.
All right. Well, I'm very pleased to be talking with Jim. So Jim runs Bendell Law Firm. Website URL is bendelllawfirm.com. As always, we will have a link in the description down below. You can also reach them at 208-981-0555. That's 208-981-0555. Jim runs a full service personal injury law firm up there in Idaho near Coeur d'Alene. And Post Falls, Idaho, actually is where he is. So everywhere, especially in the northern part of Idaho and into Washington State, I believe he works with people all throughout that area. So if you need an injury attorney in that area, and that's who we're going to be talking to today, Jim would be a wonderful resource for you. Before we get started, I'm going to jump over and read from our sponsors at the top of the hour. Our first two sponsors are nationalerc.org. You may have noticed that the entire world went through a pandemic and many businesses were forced to shut down, had reduced hours, supply chain interruptions, and ultimately suffered from, reduced revenue in 2020 and 2021. What you may not know is that Congress passed the CARES Act, which allocated over $400 billion in stimulus funds for small businesses that never needs to be paid back. It's not a loan like the Paycheck Protection Program or PPP. It's functionally free money in the form of a retroactive tax credit that can be worth as much as $26,000 per W-2 employee that you had during that shutdown. And it's in the wind down period right now. There's less than a year to claim your money. If you have not claimed that money and you had W-2 employees during the pandemic shutdown period, visit nationalerc.org. Nationalerc.org can help small businesses get the maximum amount of money, and you can calculate and see how much money you could be getting back simply by visiting nationalerc.org. The average small business that they work with gets back over $200,000 to invest in their business that, again, never needs to be paid back. And there's never any fee unless they secure funding for you, and the calculator is always free. They've helped over 9,000 businesses get back $1.3 billion in recovered funds, and they would love to be able to do that for you. Visit nationalerc.org. Our second sponsor for today is Andropology. Gentlemen, if you're looking to take charge of your health and feel your best, listen up. Whether it's managing type 2 diabetes, boosting your testosterone levels, or just wanting to increase your overall longevity, Andropology.com has got you covered. They dive deep into natural solutions from superfoods like spirulina and tart cherry extract to targeted fitness routines like high-intensity interval training or HIIT that can help you reclaim your energy and vitality. At Andropology, it's all about practical, science-backed advice tailored specifically for men who want to improve their health without the fluff. Think of it as your go-to guide for navigating the complexities of men's health, simplified. From diet tips to supplement recommendations, they have everything you need to start making positive changes today. Visit andropology.com to explore the latest insights on living healthier, more vibrant life. That's andropology.com, where better health begins. All righty, and let me jump back over here. Stop the screen share. And all right, so we are talking with not James, but Jim Bendell. Jim is a seasoned attorney with over 30 years of trial experience. He specializes, again, in personal injury law, criminal defense as well, and as business litigation, I believe, based on what it said on your website. But I think you do functionally just PI law now, if I'm not mistaken. Feel free to correct me on that.
It's most of what I do. I do other forms of litigation, but I don't do wills. I don't do document works. I do strictly courtroom work.
There you go. Okay. He has a diverse legal career that includes serving as a prosecutor, as a defense attorney, as a judge pro tem, and a court commissioner, which has earned him a reputation for his legal expertise and integrity. Clients value his commitment to achieving positive outcomes, while colleagues respect his professionalism. Jim holds a law degree from Rutgers Law School and is licensed to practice in both Idaho and Washington State. Outside of his legal work, he seems to enjoy outdoor activities in Post Falls, Idaho, where he lives with his wife. That's a small introduction to who you are, Jim, but I'm sure I missed a lot. So my very first question to you, as always, is what did I miss?
Well, I think you missed, I would say if you missed something would be that uh, you didn't really miss it, but I would just say I've done so many aspects of the law that has given me sort of a 30,000 foot view when I get a case. I mean, like, for example, personal injury, I represented insurance companies for 16 years. That's all I did. That would be car accidents, workers' compensation, medical malpractice, and so forth. Before that, I was 2 years as a prosecutor, and there I have to prove a case beyond a reasonable doubt, which is a lot harder than civil cases where it's only a preponderance of evidence. So I had to hone my teeth on those two areas of law. Then, after the 16 years were over, I switched to the other side. I now represent plaintiffs, those who are injured by the negligence or misconduct of others. So I guess I've absorbed a lot of information and looked at things from different angles. So when somebody calls me and says, "Hey, you need to know this happened in this case, ABC," I say, "Yeah, but let me tell you what the jury might also look at that you may not be seeing now." And that sort of 360-degree view is something that I call on every day in the work that I do.
Awesome. Um, Very cool. So let me ask you this, Jim. If I didn't know anything about it, and you obviously have already given me a little bit of insight about you, but let's say I was coming in totally blind, had no clue who you are. Maybe we're in an elevator going up. We got, 30 seconds a minute to sit. Tell me what you do. Give me your elevator pitch. Tell me specifically now who you help, who's your target audience, and why they choose to work with you.
So I represent people who've been hurt due to the negligence or in some cases malicious conduct of others. Normally it's a thing like a car crash, a truck crash, and so forth. But I've also, and I have represented people who've been harmed by deliberate injury or harm. For example, I've represented a number of minors who've been sexually molested by men, and this has resulted in severe psychological, psychiatric difficulties with them. They're adapting to adult life and has caused problems in their family. So I'm here to help the little guy against the big corporations, against the giant insurance companies and so forth. And so it's like a David and Goliath thing, and I like being David.
Very cool. That makes a lot of sense. So I joked about this in the pre-roll, maybe I hit it on the head. I don't know. But what got you into law? Did you grow up watching, Perry Mason and Matlock reruns, or
It's
did you kind
funny
of?
to mention that when I was younger, I did watch reruns of Perry Mason. And to this day, I can just, of course, all black and white. I can still think of scenes of him in court and his faithful secretary. And of course, the prosecutor who lost every case. I forget his name, but anyway, in the real world, it doesn't work like that. Usually the prosecutor wins. They say the difference between a good prosecutor and a bad prosecutor. A good prosecutor wins 80% of his cases, a bad one wins 70% of his cases. Why is that? Well, as some brilliant but cynical attorney told us in a lecture, the cops catch only the most obvious crimes.
That's an interesting insight. I like that. Um, Very cool. So, what got you into PI law? Because clearly you didn't start off doing that. What got you into law itself? I mean, obviously growing up watching Perry Mason, but so you just knew that that was your trajectory. You wanted to do law. And then how did you make that switch? How did you go from defense to prosecuting? You spent a little time as a judge as well. You've done a number of things in law. So tell me what was your legal path that led you to doing PI as you've been doing for so long?
Well, doing insurance defense work, I did it honorably and in a fair way. But sometimes it was sort of heartbreaking seeing what happened to accident victims. Some of them, I mean, I double amputations, uh, permanent brain damage, a person whose marital life fell apart because their brain damage, they couldn't even relate to their spouse. And, I'm not saying I'm a bleeding heart or anything, but it sort of got to me. And I figured I'm going to spend the rest of my life representing the person who's been harmed, getting them the justice they deserve.
Gotcha. Okay, very cool. Um, so let me ask you this, and this is a little off the cuff here, but I'm curious because you're up in kind of a very remote area, at least it feels remote compared to a lot of places. Um, up there in Iowa. And one of the
Idaho.
sponsors, or sorry, I keep saying Iowa. Sorry, I live next to Iowa. I know you're not in Iowa. I know you're in Idaho. I just keep saying the wrong thing. If I call you Ohio later too, for whatever
That's
reason,
right.
ever since I was a kid, all three of those in my head get jumbled. I know the difference very distinctly. I've been to all three of them, but they for whatever reason I'll lapse and say the wrong thing. So like if I call you James accidentally. So
That's right.
um so one of the sponsors of the podcast is National ERC. We talked about the pandemic that we all got through, about 4 years ago. It feels like it was not that long ago, but it's hard to believe it's already been almost 4 years. And I'm curious because different people in different areas had very different experiences with the pandemic. So I'm curious, up there in your neck of the woods in Idaho, how did the pandemic affect you? How did it affect your practice? Did it change anything that you do on a day-to-day basis? Did you guys have to completely shut down? Did it renovate the way that you do things so that now you brought new systems in place? Like, was it a net good, net bad, the overall reaction to the pandemic?
Well, of course, the pandemic itself and the vaccines and all the other illnesses and people in elderly homes dying without seeing their family members, it was all bad. In terms of my work, I stopped when the government had emergency shutdown. I was only out of my office for 2 weeks because the governor declared that only essential services would be continuing to work. And then the Supreme Court made a decree that the practice of law is to be considered an essential service. I imagine he did that because otherwise, people who rob banks and rape people and so forth, they would not get prosecuted. And that's kind of essential to have that stuff taken care of. So I was only down for 2 weeks. Yeah, business slowed down a bit. And then for a while, no human beings were allowed in the courthouse except for court staff. So I had to do a lot of things by Zoom. Actually, I had one case, I did an entire trial by Zoom. Me and my client were at one computer, the other side was at another computer. The judge was at her computer in her office. It was not a jury trial, so we didn't need 12 more computers. And I did a 3-day trial by Zoom, and actually it was kind of pleasant. I mean, it wasn't any more difficult than a regular trial. And it was something I'll never forget, but it didn't in any way harm the long term of my practice.
What do you feel about a Zoom jury? Would that be a net benefit or a net loss?
I would not like a net jury because I think part of the work we do when we pick a jury, the voir dire process it's called, is you have to get a sense of which jurors. I mean, a juror can be thrown off a jury for cause. Like somebody says, "Look, I was in a car accident last year. I hate insurance companies. I cannot be fair." The judge will ask them to leave. In addition to that, each attorney gets a certain amount of what they call preemptory challenges that you can ask threes, four, five, six, depending on the type of case, to be excused, and you don't have to give a reason. So what you have to do is you ask questions, have you ever been in an accident or have you ever been a victim of a crime? But then you get you want a sort of a human gut feeling about that person. You want to see what their facial remarks, manifestations are when they talk. And so I want to be live in that courtroom picking a jury. I think I would lose something by Zoom.
Makes sense. I talked about this with a few other people. One of them said that the most important part of any case sometimes is when you're in there and you're representing your client and the prosecutor, the defense, whatever side, they make a statement that you know isn't right or isn't good, and you're able to look over immediately and make eye contact with that juror. They see you, you see them, and you kind of know that you're on the same wavelength. Like it's an important feedback. Whereas here on Zoom, I'm looking into my camera. I'm not even looking at the picture of you on my screen, and that's how I best simulate eye contact. So it is kind of very unnatural in some ways. Although there's technologies that they're putting out there now to like autocorrect your eyes, so wherever you're looking, your eyes are always still looking, towards the camera, which I think is a neat concept. But no, I would agree with that. I feel like a really big aspect of the law would be missed. But I do love that everyone knows how to Zoom now. It made the podcast possible because all of a sudden attorneys knew how to Zoom. I had to walk them through downloading some random software on their computer. So for me, it was a net benefit, but it's interesting to see how people get out with that. So let's talk about your practice a little bit, Jim. You've been practicing law for a long time. You've been practicing for over 30 years. You've got a lot of experience under your belt. And with that comes, I'm sure, a lot of great wins, but also a handful of failures or a handful of successes. I'm a firm believer that there's no such thing as a real failure as long as you learn from it. It's just a slow burn win. So are you able to let my listeners know about a time in your practice of law, maybe on the prosecution side or defense side, maybe on the plaintiff side, let my listeners know about a time when you experienced a failure or a setback, but what did you learn from it, and how do you carry that forward to make sure you're giving the best care to your clients?
Well, I would say the biggest disappointment and shocker, it was back when I was a prosecutor. I was prosecuting a drunk driving case. It was a solid case. The blood alcohol level was 1.5, and at the time the legal limit was 1.0. So the driver was clearly over the limit. Drunk drivers kill and maim people every year, all the time. I have heard, and I don't know if this is still a good statistic, after 9 at night, 25% of the people on the road are legally impaired. Now, that's before we talk about marijuana, fentanyl, things like that, just the booze. But anyway, I went through the trial, put the policeman on, had a forensic pathologist explain the blood alcohol, what it means in terms of the effect on the brain and so forth. It was, a lead cinch case. Well, jury's had about 5 hours, 6 hours, kind of long for DUI. And juror has a question. So the jurors have to all come in, the attorneys come back, the judge comes back, and the juror foreperson said, did the policeman read the defendant his Miranda rights? And the judge said something very neutral, said, look, you need to consider the information before you. You've been given all the legal instructions that apply, and you make your decision. Well, they came back 3 hours later, not guilty. Now, why was I crushed? The Miranda warning must be given if you're going to use statements by the accused against him in court. So if I arrest somebody and obviously they're in my custody, I'm a policeman, I'm going to ask them questions about how much did you drink tonight? Did you use any drugs tonight? I first have to read them the Miranda rights, that anything they say can be used against them. If I don't do that, they can confess to murdering 100 people. They cannot be prosecuted. In the case I'm talking about, there was no testimony about statements made by the defendant because he didn't say anything. He blew on a breathalyzer, they brought him to the jail, and he was arrested. So somebody on the jury maybe watched too many Perry Masons or whatever, thought they were a lawyer and said, you know what? We need to find this guy not guilty because he wasn't read his Miranda rights. And I remember after the trial was over, the jury worked out. I just sat there at my table, and the judge came over to me and says, well, that's the way I was a young lawyer at the time. You just got to understand in this system, there are things that happen that don't make any sense. So I'll always remember that. I mean, fortunately, it wasn't a murder, it wasn't a rape or anything like that. So a guy got away with drunk driving. But I was disappointed because I thought it was unfair.
So when you were a prosecutor, did you win 80% or 70% of the time?
I don't know. I didn't keep track. I won most of them. I would say that.
There you go. So let me ask you the flip side of that coin, Jim. I'm sure that sometimes when you fall asleep at night, right before your head hits the pillow, right before you black out, you think back to a case very fondly, like, oh, I'm so glad things worked out this way. I can't believe, maybe it was a case you thought you totally bombed, and then the jury came back and sided with you. Maybe it was just a client whose life had fallen apart and you really helped them put things back together. But tell my listeners about maybe one or two of the cases that are kind of the feathers in your proverbial cap.
Well, I have one case where I obtained $1.5 million judgment against the state's social health services because there were a couple of parents who were druggies, and the children obviously had to be removed from the home and placed in foster care. Well, under the law, the statute in the state where this happened, they're supposed to be placed with, as if possible, with a relative. The state chose not to do that. And we found out going through the state files that the reason was, oh, these are Jehovah's Witnesses. Let's not place them there. Now, I'm not a Jehovah's Witness, but I do believe in freedom of religion. That was wrong to do. So they put these three kids on a semi-hobby farm. And these foster parents were not related to them, had no love for them, didn't send them to school, supposedly homeschooled them, but really didn't. And they made them do work and chores on the farm. So they were getting paid by the state for being foster parents. And then they were making money because they putting these kids to work as mules on the farm. And in that case, the settlement, I think, was very fair. It was a hard slog when you go up against the state. I mean, the state has 50 or 100,000 lawyers. You're one lawyer.
Yeah.
So again, it was another David-Goliath scenario. So I really feel happy and proud about the result in that case. And these children, the money was put in a trust for them. It's probably still they're earning interest and they use it for their education and whatnot. That was a real good result.
That's awesome. Just out of curiosity, I don't know if you're allowed to even share this or if you recall, how old were these children?
Well, there were, I think, well, this is a way back. So I was going to say probably 8, 12, and 14, something like that.
I was honestly just
We're
curious.
old
Like,
enough to be able to work on a farm.
well, that was my question. Like, how much work were they getting done? Was this a 3-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a
No,
7-year-old?
no, they weren't that young. They were old enough that they could actually make them pick whatever crop they were growing and clean the barn, muck the stables, and so forth.
Gotcha. There is something to be said for, a hardworking education, but in that situation, I do think that was definitely
No,
not an ideal,
no,
not an
no.
ideal scenario.
Especially when
Um,
the state broke the law. They should have
yeah,
been placed with relatives. And I got to meet the relatives that love these kids and would have been happy to take care of them.
yeah. Separating kids from their parents is one thing. It's bad, but to put them with complete strangers, especially when
Yeah.
there's loving family members that are
So,
available and willing to
yeah,
take,
yeah.
I don't understand the justification for that. So that is, well, congratulations on that. That's huge.
Thank you.
You've just shared a couple of things with me, actually, and both of these I feel like could fit into this category to some extent. But I'll go ahead and ask you my third related question. That is just simply this. I'm sure in your practice of law, you've encountered some real absurdities, whether it's, a guy getting off because he didn't get his Miranda rights read to him, which didn't apply to anything in the situation, or the state making such a huge goof. But are there any other just totally random, bizarre, absurd things you've encountered? Things that happened in the courtroom, out of the courtroom, or just the type of case that came, or the evidence that you've discovered, or anything like that? What's one or two of the most absurd things you've encountered in your practice of law, Jim?
Well, this was a potential client interview, and the client came in, and this is many years ago. She was a real Barbie doll fan. And she was in her mid-20s, but she had all her life collected Barbie dolls. And apparently, I know nothing about this, right? But Barbie changed the mannequin style or whatever. In her view, it ruined the Barbie image. And she came to me and wanted me to file a lawsuit against, I don't know who makes Barbie dolls, whatever company that
No.
is, on the Mattel, maybe it's Mattel. And I had to stop myself from laughing. I mean, if you make dolls, you make them any shape you want. It was one of the most peculiar lawsuit requests. To this day, and we're talking, this is probably 25 years ago, I still remember it. Very weird.
That is really bizarre. Like, oh, you ruined my ability to collect Barbies because she's shaped slightly different now. I think I
That's right.
remember this happening. Like, I do remember a discussion about like they were giving her a slightly more realistic proportion or something like that. Though my daughters play with Barbies very occasionally. We're not big Barbie fans, and I still think they look grossly unproportional. But yeah,
Well,
it
you've heard about the new divorce Barbie, haven't you?
comes with all Ken stuff.
Comes with half a can stuff. Yeah, all right.
Yeah.
I guess I'll put that joke away for now.
No, it's a good one. I collect really dumb jokes. You know any good what's your favorite attorney joke? Do you got any attorney jokes?
What do you call a busload of attorneys going off a cliff?
I'm gonna guess it's a similar answer to what do you call 1,000 attorneys at the bottom of the ocean.
A good start.
That's my always my go-to my go-to one for attorneys. There was another one and again, I love attorneys. I work with attorneys all the time. They're, my main people I interview on this podcast. But it's really good to have I think a sense of self-deprecating humor sometimes. It shows real situational awareness. Of course,
Sure.
a lot of people don't like the attorney until they need the attorney, and then all of a sudden the
That's right.
attorney is their
Oh,
best
you
friend.
you don't know how many people have come to me who've been injured and said, I never believed I would be in an attorney's office before, but my left arm doesn't work anymore. I
Yeah.
hear that all the time.
Absolutely. Well, and here's something I'm going to say, and my listeners, I've gone off on this with other people as well in the past, so my listeners know how I feel about this, but I love the PI space because you guys work very differently from most other attorneys. I mean, average attorney fees are something like $200 to $500 an hour. They can go up to $1,500 to $2,500 an hour in some places, but injury attorneys generally work on a contingency fee basis.
Right?
So you guys work, you take the onus on yourself. You only take a case if you think it has merit, and then you throw your heart and your soul into prosecuting that case or going after the case. And, I'm sure you bat pretty high. Most attorneys pick cases really well. So they bat, 80, 90%, just like being a good prosecutor, right? Being a good defense or being a good attorney, good plaintiff's attorney. It's kind of a similar boat, but you don't get paid if they don't win, if they don't get a
Yeah,
settlement.
that's a real incentive. Not only do I not get paid, but if I file a case today, I'll get a trial date maybe 14 months in the future. During that time, I'm paying court reporters for depositions. I'm paying for medical records. If I have to consult with a doctor, I got to pay a doctor. And I got news for you, their rates are higher than mine. And I'm putting out money, not getting any income. So my incentive to do a good job is real strong.
What do you think is the most you've ever spent on a case? Hopefully that won. Or are there any that you remember that didn't win? You're like, man, I sunk 100 grand into this or something like
I
that.
remember one case that put out $50,000 cost. I got it back in the recovery, but I was sweating bullets. It's a lot of money.
So if you guys are listening, just understand that when your injury attorney is representing you, they're really representing you. They go all out. It really is. It's a very, what's the word I want to use? It's like a concierge service because you guys basically take care of everything. You're like anything that they have to take care of, they have to take care of. But you guys do soup to nuts, just about everything for them. So
Oh,
again, I've always
for example,
got
that they go to their regular doctor visits because if it gets in front of a jury and the insurance attorney pulls out the medical file and shows missed visits, that hurts the case. So you got to keep on the client to do all the right things. Another one, stay off of social media. There was a somewhat legendary case about 10 years ago. A woman did get a serious back injury and she was an athletic woman, young lady, and she just pushed herself. So one time she went water skiing. Well, as happens, the insurance company had investigated following her, and that was not the problem. The problem was she posted on social media, I don't know, Facebook or something, her water skiing, and the insurance lawyer at trial showed that to the jury, destroyed the case.
What do you think are some of the technological changes that have come about in the last 15 or 20 years? Social media obviously is going to be a big one. Things like dash cams becoming more popular, more normal. What are the big technological trends you think coming down the pipe that are going to change everything in the law space?
Well, for example, it's already happened with Google. And Google's what, about 10, 15 years old. When the judge instructs the jury in the beginning of the case, listen to the evidence, do not go online and look these things up yourself. you can be assured they will go online and look it up. If there was a car wreck that was in the news, they will look that up. If there was a doctor who testifies, they will look up the health grade stuff on that doctor. So you have to try the case knowing that the jury is, out of curiosity, they are going to go online. And if your client, last year robbed a bank and now he got in a car accident, that's not going to be good.
Yeah, we don't recommend that.
That's why
Don't.
we have to screen cases very carefully, very carefully.
So when the client comes to you, do you yourself, or do you have an assistant that goes through their social media and kind of does a comb through to see if there's anything
We
that would?
eventually do. I just flat out ask them questions, and then I hand them with their representation agreement a social media guideline, which says you can talk about politics, you can do other things like that. Don't talk about your injury. Or if it's a breach of contract, don't talk about the other lousy contractor who took advantage of it. Just keep that off the internet.
Good advice, absolutely. And maybe don't talk about politics too, because I may or may not be the type of person who gets his accounts completely lost and suspended due to, an errant joke here or there politically.
Yeah, yeah.
That's the world in which we live these days. So, it is.
It really is. There is some sort of censorship, which I don't appreciate. I think people will be free to say what they want, even if it's stupid.
Yeah. No, I would agree with that 100%. Learned it the hard way, maybe. I don't know. I don't think anything I said was stupid. I think I just made a joke that the powers that be didn't like, but that's it is what it is, right? I'm a little salty about it because I lost, I want to say 15 years of child photos of my own children that were stored on Facebook servers, and it is
Oh
what it is.
my
I'm
God.
not, but I'm bitter. The end of the day, it's their platform. They can do as they see fit. But
Yeah, that's
it's one of
right.
those things where there's no recourse either. There's no
Oh,
like appeals process. It's all one big automated sloop that nobody ever gets out of. So it
no,
was
in
just a
fact, the
loop.
courts have held that if I
Yeah.
put on Facebook that you are a creep, that you beat up your wife, and that you neglect your children, I can sue you. I cannot sue Facebook. Whereas, a normal business, like if I'm working at Sears and I drop a lawnmower on you, well, they can sue me and they can sue Sears. Doesn't work on Facebook.
Nope.
Facebook can put whatever they want there. They cannot be sued. Now, there's legislative attempts now to change that, but that's the way it is.
Yeah. It's that Section 203 protection or whatever it's called. So
Yep.
very interesting. Well, Jim, I don't want to take up your whole day. I am enjoying the conversation and I'm enjoying your insights. So here in a minute, I'm going to ask you my closing questions, and I'll give this to you now, just so you can kind of percolate on them, and then we're going to jump over and look at your site again and read from our last sponsor. Question number one will be, if we can go back in time and meet young Jim, and you were able to give him some advice, fresh out of law school, what advice would you give yourself and why, other than the obvious, which is, of course, trust me, there's a thing called Bitcoin. Buy it when it's $20 a coin and hold on to it because it'll hit 60K. And then question number two is, if I gave you my magic pin. Now, this pin was blessed by the priests of St. Benedict's Abbey in Atchison, Kansas. So I'll give them a free shout out, kansasmonks.org. But one of the priests must have blessed this pin, because I found that it can strike laws from the books, it can edit laws that are on the books, or it can add new laws to the books. So what if I gave you this pin? Would you edit, add, or change? While you percolate on that, we're going to jump over and take a look again at your website. Again, I'm talking with Jim Bendell, who runs the eponymous law firm that bears his name. That is BendellLawFirm.com. We'll have a link to that
So, do you want to wait till you're finished? I'm sorry.
Let me give this here and then we'll come back over.
Yeah.
Link in the description down below. That's Jim, BendellLawFirm.com. You can also call him at 208-981-0555. You can request a free consultation. As always, consultations are free and there's no fee unless he gets a successful verdict for you as well, I believe, is the way that you would state that. So our final sponsor for today is Rank with News. So I want to jump over here and take a look at that. Is not being in the news regularly costing your firm or your company credibility and visibility? Do you feel that getting found in Google is more about dumb luck than science? What if there was a guaranteed way of getting your law firm or your business featured in major national publications like Yahoo News, Forbes, Bloomberg, and others, and having those articles ranking locally, sometimes nationally, in under 8 hours for major competitive keywords that people were looking for? Well, if that was the case, what else would you need to know? Rank with News is simply the most powerful way to hit page one in under 2 weeks, safely organically, and more or less permanently. This is like guaranteed SEO or search engine optimization on steroids, ranking quickly and sticking long term. If you're tired of poor visibility for your business, visit rankwithnews.com to learn more and to book a time to speak with a specialist and have a demo to show you how they can feature your firm or your law firm or your business in major national 8 and 9-figure traffic sites that can launch you to page 1 of Google in a matter of hours and help you dominate your local marketplace. Get media exposure, rank higher in Google, build credibility, and win more clients with rankwithnews.com. There we go. All right. So, Jim, we go back in time and we meet young Jim, and you're able to go over to yourself and give yourself a little bit of advice. What advice would you give yourself and why?
The advice would be when you leave the office, leave the work there and don't take it home. I'm like most attorneys. I think about my cases at night. I know of one attorney, he actually has a clipboard next to his bed. He'll wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning and write things down. Now, I'm not that hyper, OCD about it, but it is one of the jobs that when you leave the office, you do take a lot of things home. You think, oh, gee, I need to do this, I got to do that. I feel bad what happened to this client, those things tear at you. There's a novel I read about. It's a World War I novel, and it takes place in Italy. And the punchline, I guess you say it was a young man was told that if you go into a profession, whether you're a doctor or a lawyer or something like that, it's like you have an anaconda wrapped around you. Sometimes it's tight, sometimes it loosens up, but it's always there. And part of being a lawyer, I would tell myself, is that you will never be separated from your job. You'll take it at night, you'll take it when you're having fun with your family. Your family will catch you staring off in the distance thinking about a case. And if you want to go into law, you need to accept this is going to happen.
That's good advice. And it really is. And I imagine that's kind of a constant struggle. But you always, I mean, your laboratory is your brain, right? You're always
Yep.
trying to find a new angle to look at the case. What would be the most damning thing that we could find that would totally exonerate this or do this or whatnot. And so, and sometimes inspiration comes in the, 2 o'clock in the morning or
That's
whatever.
right.
So
It has happened. It has happened to me. It actually has. Yeah.
you ever started yourself awake from a dream with a sudden revelation? It was like, oh no, this is what we need to do, and you write it
Well, I don't
down.
know about a dream, but I've woken up at 2 o'clock in the morning and thought, oh man, this is what we got to do. Yeah, it happened.
Well, there you go. So, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen out there, keep a notebook by your bed. You never know when inspiration's going to hit. Okay, so magic pen time. This is my magic pen, and I give it to you, Jim. You can make one change. It can be a big change, a law with sweeping national, even international ramifications outside of the PI space if you want, or it could be a stupid little local law that forces you to fill out forms in triplicate 8 times a week, or anywhere in between. If I give you my pen, you can make one change. Add a law, strike a law, or edit a law. What change would you make and why?
I would strike all those state laws that limit non-economic damages. What do I mean by that? When you have a person who's injured, you're entitled to get their medical bills. Of course, that gets paid right back to Blue Cross, whatever, their wage loss, and pain and suffering. But pain and suffering is considered a non-economic loss. It's, if you have a leg amputated, what it's like to go through life with only one leg. Some states, like Idaho, have a dollar limit on that. And Idaho has another limit. Damages for pain and suffering extinguish upon the death of the plaintiff. And this comes up in nursing home cases, and you've heard about them, where nursing homes collect a lot of money, they deliberately understaff, they don't pay enough staff. And so you have these people who sometimes are not even verbal, and they won't turn them over enough times, and they get bed sores. The bed sores develop necrosis. I had one case I was consulted on where the necrosis was so bad that the buttock tissue had to be largely removed, and he had bone sticking out. That's that's a lot of pain and suffering. Now, you're not going to collect any loss of income because this 80-year-old person's not working anymore. You can get the medical bills, but they'll go right back to Medicare. So all you have is pain and suffering. If he dies the day before trial, that's the end of the case right there. The second thing we have here is a limit on non-economic damages. A lot of states have that. That's limited to $400,000. Well, sounds like a lot of money. Let me think about this. Let's assume I'm in a car wreck and the glass shatters and I lose vision in both my eyes. I'm 25 years old. I will never see for the rest of my life. There's no medical bills that can't cure the eye. There's no ongoing drugs they're going to give me. I just am blind for the rest of my life. I can only get $400,000 and for that blindness. And to me, I think being blind for 45 years is worth more than that. And so this has come about largely through the lobbying by insurance companies, spreading myths about trial lawyers ruining the economy, shutting down businesses. And that's not what we do. What we do is get justice for people against people who are acting negligently. And if somebody goes through a red light and I go blind because of that, I want full damages for me or for my client.
That makes perfect sense. No, I agree with that 100%. And you're not the first injury attorney that I've interviewed to say almost exactly that answer. So it really is, I think, an issue that's kind of a thorn in everyone's side. And it makes perfect sense as something to get rid of, because it feels like injustice at the end of the day, right? If I'm going to blind you and I'm going to, take off both your legs, and now the rest of your life you're without legs or whatnot, you can't see, you can't enjoy a sunrise anymore. Sure, some people are born that way, you can't help that, but
Yeah.
if I've taken that from you, I've deprived you from that, you deserve some sort of remuneration or compensation. Random side question: I've heard that they're looking at things, Elon Musk and his Neuralink and everything else, they're really of the mindset that they may be able to do implants at some point where you could give vision back to somebody. I'm curious what the possibility would be for someone who's in a car accident and got the minimum, $400,000 or the maximum $400,000, that's it, case closed, and covered their medical bills. Well, if something happens in the future, like all of a sudden, hey, we can give you your eyesight back, is that something they can go back and relitigate, or are they just kind of,
No,
for
once
lack,
the trial is over, that's it. In
they're
fact,
they're
in a final argument, I always say to the jury, your decision today is permanent. If 10 or 20 years from now, it turns out really much worse for my client than you thought, he can't come back to trial. She can't come back to trial. So, yeah, like for example, they have cured deafness with a cochlear implant. And you don't hear it quite as well as you did before, but you can hear. That's wonderful. I'm not sure how hard that's going to do with eyes. If the eye damage is due to what part of the brain, there's a part of the brain that governs vision. I can see that. But if your blindness was caused because the eye tissue itself was pierced by an object, boy, that's going to be a little tough. They're going to have to come up with not only that, but a robotic eye. Maybe it'll happen. Maybe Elon Musk will do it. But I don't see it happening next week.
well, probably not next week, but who knows what next decade will bring.
That's
So
right.
we'll see what happens. Well, Jim, thank you very much for taking the time to talk with me today. I always like to let my guests have the final word. Is there any parting words of wisdom or last thoughts you'd like to leave our listeners with?
I would just say this. Number one, be careful what you do. Be careful driving. Don't text while you're driving. Things that you can do can affect somebody for the rest of their life. Don't drink while you're driving. I don't want to seem like a preacher or something like that, but we need to be kind to each other. And
Amen.
maybe I'd lose a lot of business if that happened, but you know what? Make me happy.
Yeah, let's put Jim out of business. Please drive safely, everybody. I think that's a great message to end on. So thank you very much for
My
that, Jim.
pleasure as well.
I agree 100%. Well, ladies and gentlemen, as always, I'm your host, Justin West, and this is the Attorney Post. I've been chatting with Jim Bendell, who runs the Bendell Law Firm. As again, links and phone number in the description down below. As always, this podcast, though we do talk about a lot of legal issues on the podcast, does not itself constitute legal advice. And should you find yourself in need of legal advice, I would recommend you find a competent attorney in your area who specializes in the aspect of law that you need help in. Obviously, you're in the northern Idaho area. You're in Washington State, on the border right there as well. Jim seems like he has a great head on his shoulders and be a wonderful resource for you with an incredible amount of experience to back you in your case. So I would highly recommend you reach out and get a hold of him if you find yourself in need of an injury attorney and you live in those areas. As far as the podcast goes, if you're watching this on YouTube, we always appreciate a like, a subscribe, and a share. If you're on any of the podcast repositories, we always appreciate as well if you rate us, review us, or whatever it happens to be. And the single most important thing you can do is if you know somebody who would benefit from this podcast, please share it with them so that they can get the information that they need to help them with the situation that they are in. Because, as I always say, if you don't know your rights, you don't have any. Until next time, thank you guys for listening, and bye-bye.